You wake up in 1950, you're 20 again, with no identifiable paperwork, no house, no connections, only a suitcase filled with $50,000. What are you going to do? Story 1. To put inflation in perspective. My dad bought a house in the Portland West Hills for $2,400 in 1961. He made 4 payments of $600 from his wages as a machinist. I looked on Zillow a couple of years ago, and that house is now worth $2,100,000. $50K was a lot of money in 1950. Story 2. I'd invest my money as much as possible. Then go to rock and roll concerts. I'd love to see Buddy Holly, Richie Valens. Hopefully, I can make it to the 60s to see the Beatles, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and attend Woodstock, of course. Story 3. It's easy to say that I'd invested and become a billionaire by 30, but I've thought about what kind of industry I'd go into if I had to live life in the past with today's current knowledge. I'd beg, borrow, and steal to get a job as a regional scout for an MLB team and easily work my way up as a scouting wunderkind until I became the single greatest talent evaluating general manager of all time, leading my team to a dynasty that spanned decades. I can't play baseball, but I sure would be able to pick tomorrow's next superstars if I got to do it Biff Tannen style. Story 4. Nobody watched Back to the Future 2? Sports betting. Bet on anything and everything. The amount of money you could make off of sure things in the past is nearly unlimited. It wouldn't be hard to turn that $50K into billions at all. Story 5. Bury the suitcase of money somewhere nobody but me can find it. Get registered by claiming to the authorities that I was an unregistered birth, raised in a rural cult, which I escaped, and do not know enough information to be able to lead authorities to it. If I'm asked for my parents' names, reply with Papa and Mama. Get a basic job, but quickly use my amazing science and statistics knowledge to rise up fast in the world around me. Dig up the $50K and use it to buy a property in a major city like New York or Los Angeles. Invest the rest into companies I know will do well. Story 6. I'm not sure about what the laws are or were back then, but I do believe it was reasonably easy to adopt a new identity. So I'd establish an identity. Then I'd do some wise investments based on what I know now. Buy some acreage, at least 50 or so, and have a house built. Then I'd just enjoy my relatively obscurity. Story 7. There's stocks, but also buying abstract expressionist artwork, a small property in Martha's Vineyard, Sag Harbor, or Soho. Placing yourself and your knowledge at the right points in history could financially benefit you exponentially. Or you could change history just saying. Story 8. I wouldn't do it. I'm a 57-year-old female. My husband and I have been married for 36 years. I have 3 adult children, one with severe autism, who we are legal guardians for. I don't want to go through periods again. I don't want to have more children. I don't want to see how ignorant people are about everything that we've learned in the last 50 years. And I would be too afraid of changing anything. Plus, women weren't normally allowed to have checking accounts on their own until the 1970s. Story 9. Find a local graveyard and look for an infant's grave that matches your gender and approximate age. Now you have a full government name, DOB, and likely place of birth. Follow the Andy Dufresne method and submit a letter to the state government for a birth certificate. And with that, go get a DL or ID card. Now you're employable. Invest in heavy industry or real estate or oil leases, and go to school and study for like $10. Story 10. Go to a cemetery and get the DOB and name of a person my age. Go get a copy of my birth certificate. Use the birth certificate to get a SSN. Buy a used car for cash from a private party. Rent a room in a boarding house where I can get mail. Make an appointment to get a driver's license and use the address of the boarding house. Leave town and go to Arizona. Buy lots of land in Sedona and Flagstaff. Enjoy being rich because I will know to buy Apple, Microsoft, and Walmart stocks. Story 11. Well, I've worked in IT for 25 years, so immediately all of my skills and experience are now useless. But you also didn't need 3 degrees and 200 years experience to gain an entry-level job back then. So I'll probably be able to pick up something while I use my suitcase money to temporarily live in a hotel and figure out my next move. Story 12. I break into Tiffany's at midnight. Do I go for the vault? No, I go for the chandelier. It's priceless. As I'm taking it down, a woman catches me. She tells me to stop. It's her father's business. She's Tiffany. I say no. We make love all night. In the morning, the cops come and I escape in one of their uniforms. I tell her to meet me in Mexico, but I go to Canada. I don't trust her. Besides, I like the cold. 30 years later, I get a postcard. I have a son and he's the chief of police. This is where the story gets interesting. I tell Tiffany to meet me in Paris by the Trocadero. She's been waiting for me all these years. She's never taken another lover. I don't care. I don't show up. I go to Berlin. That's where I stash the chandelier. Story 13. As stated before, Try to find a legal way to get me an identity, get a few houses, rent them, find a job, and on December 12, 1980, buy as many stocks from Apple as possible and keep buying more stocks. Then, on June 29, 2010, buy as much as I can of Tesla stocks. Story 14. You could certainly buy a house with that, but I would probably rent until I got a steady job, live the life I want. Edit. I guess the catch is a lack of identity. That would make things challenging. Technically, you shouldn't exist, therefore the government could grant you nothing. The sky is the limit, I guess, on what could happen. Story 15. Find someone to set me up with a new identity so I could work. Buy a small house in LA, invest, get a part-time job as a secretary or waitress to keep up appearances. Maybe become a singer-songwriter, borrowing from artists that haven't been born yet. Not someone's whole catalog, but some later hits that won't disrupt their own careers. I can invest my modest royalties and do a tour of I need an infusion of cash. As I get more money, just quietly reinvest and buy property in places that will boom. San Francisco, NYC, London, Hyderabad, and have my firm purchase some properties in places Middle Eastern regions that will be discovered to have oil. After I'm born, I will send my parents money, stock tips, and open a trust for myself so I can get a better education and not have the loans I am still paying off. Story 16. Bet it all on the Yankees to sweep the Phillies in the 1950 WS. Then take that cash and invest. Might buy a few Mickey Mantle Topps rookie cards and actually get them signed by Mantle. Get a few Honus Wagner and Babe Ruth cards as well. But invest in the market and bet on a few sports games and horse races along the way. Definitely buy some land in Hawaii and Aspen and along the Calif Coast. Maybe buy an island in the Caribbean. Story 17. I think it was easier to set up a new identity back then, to start a new life. Having money would help with that. You would be wealthy if you could keep your money safe and hopefully invest some of it. The question really is, what do you want to do with your life? The same as now. There might be fewer obstacles of one kind, but more of another. Being in the wrong time would probably be extremely challenging emotionally. So how to adjust? Find the kind of life/community you want. How to fit in well enough to be safe. How to be happy. Do you want to settle down and have a family? Start a business? Get your fingers dirty in politics? What do you want to do with your life when you have the power to do it, or at least some of it? How to make more money with that money isn't the hardest part of the question. How to survive in a different time and find a way to thrive in a world where literally no one will ever truly understand your life up to then, or your reality. You are going to be so alone, and you are going to need to address that before it gets bad. You'll be visibly, audibly, culturally different. You'll have to learn to mask, to go along with at least some social norms you don't understand or approve of. You'll have so much to learn, and it may be years before you can safely let your guard down. At best, you'll be rich, eccentric, with a respected place in some reasonable community. You may always be at risk in different ways. It will be a huge culture shock, and sometimes you might just wish you could go home. You will need to be as mentally and emotionally healthy as possible to survive, and not risk confiding in anyone, because you would literally risk an insane asylum. Story $18.50K in 1950 at 20 years of age. Live modestly to make the money last. Win huge betting huge on big fights and games where I remembered who won and how. Invest winnings into a dividend-paying portfolio of stocks and bonds. Use other cash for options on big stock market and currency moves I remembered. I'd be wealthy in a fairly short period of time. I'd put myself through uni and do my grad degree at Yale. Probably JD. By 1957, I'd be distinguished educationally and already financially independent. I'd be just 27. I might have a little fun then and become known as a mystic, something akin to a modern-day Nostradamus. I'd talk about big, historical, to me, events that hadn't yet happened. I'd use mostly vague or abstract descriptions, but with key details that, after the event, would make everyone believe I was truly clairvoyant. I would predict the Gulf of Tonkin incident and call it a complete sham. I'd predict the Cuban Missile Crisis and the attack on the USS Liberty. I would predict the assassinations of JFK, MLK, and RFK. I would tell about the helter-skelter murders of the Manson family, MK Ultra, our plan to go to the moon. I'd predict the whole cultural revolution to come in the 1960s. Story 19. Here's how I would try to actually get away with this. Find estate sales/auctions, jewelry fairs, and coin collecting conventions. Turn most of the cash into jewelry, precious stones, and maybe gold coins. The best is jewelry you can wear on your person. It is easier to get away with not declaring at customs. The next best are precious stones that are easy to hide in luggage, shoe heels, etc. Assuming you are in the U.S., travel to Key West, Florida, and bribe your way onto somebody's pleasure boat to cruise over to Cuba. Pull up to a deserted beach and the pleasure boat's tender at night. get dropped off on shore, and walk into the country. Be at least slightly drunk. If the authorities stop you early on, they'll believe you're just a wasted tourist that went swimming with his passport again. Cuba at this time is very corrupt. Bribe an official into making you a Cuban passport, even if it costs a lot of money. Be sure to come from a place whose birth records had been lost in a fire if you can. If you are super paranoid, torch the courthouse yourself when you are sure no one is in there. There is no RFID and no biometrics in 1950. A genuine Cuban passport is a genuine Cuban passport, and their record-keeping is about to go completely to shit in a few short years thanks to some asshole named Castro. Hitch a ride back out of Cuba on a pleasure boat, only this time go through customs on the way back. You are now a Cuban citizen legally in America. If you are willing to potentially take a hit in import tariffs, you could even declare all of your jewelry and precious stones, effectively laundering them. When the revolution happens, you will be able to claim asylum and eventually American citizenship, with no traceable way to prove your existence is built on sketchy documents. Sell the remaining jewelry and pay the taxes on the sale, if any. If the IRS asks you what's up, tell them you inherited the jewelry from a family member in Cuba and you brought it here to the U.S. to sell. The nicer the pieces are, the more plausible this is. At this point, you are in the U.S. legally, on your way to citizenship, with probably $20,000, $30,000 of fully laundered, legal, tax-paid money. You are home free. You need to either live in a place where gambling is legal or within a reasonable drive of a place where gambling is legal. You then set half of your money aside into a gambling fund, and half goes to things like buying a house, a car, sound investments, those kinds of things. You use the gambling fund to bet big on things you know for certain, like Secretariat winning the Kentucky Derby, Ali winning the Thrilla in Manila and the Rumble in the Jungle, England winning the 1966 World Cup, Green Bay winning Super Bowl I, that kind of thing. If you can find a place to do it legally, bet on things like presidential elections. With the gambling money, you should also buy cheap things that you know will skyrocket in value eventually, like Rolex watches, standout kids, toys, baseball cards, comic books, and definitely cars if you perform or arrange for the storage and upkeep. If you don't know cars, just buy at least one of every car Ferrari ever makes. Have them appraised every now and again. At this point, you are pretty much all set. You are fully legal and you are building significant wealth. If you want to work, get a job as a writer. Write versions of all of the stories you know that haven't been written yet, or songs. You could also get a job as a photographer and just make sure you are always at the right place at the right time for major events. If you are technically minded, you could easily become an inventor, but I suspect most of us have a few things we could invent in the 1950s, even if it is just the Snuggie. Story 20. I'd try to blend in at first, spend the money carefully over time so it didn't arouse suspicion, rent a place, get a job, buy a house, buy another house and rent it out. Learn as much as I can about housing, zoning, and transportation law. Build a housing empire as big as I could. Get involved in transportation business. Try to get involved legally and ethically in the government. Change the laws to improve housing and zoning. Fix the damn insanity that is the U.S.'s infrastructure and housing before it ever gets to be like today. That or die early on from something easily treated by medicine today, who knows? I'm feeling ambitious either way. Story 21 first. I'd buy a modest house and set up a bank account with some of that cash. Then, I'd invest in blue-chip stocks like IBM and General Electric and perhaps grab some Coca-Cola shares. I'd also keep an eye on up-and-coming companies like McDonald's and Disney. Finally, I'd network and start a small business to build a stable income. Story 22. Tirelessly lay the groundwork to have an unimaginably easy life while simultaneously screwing over the next generation, but also creating a culture of entitlement so that I'm able to actively blame the next generation for the problems I created, yet demonstrate no gratitude or appreciation for how easy I had it myself. Need to blend in. Story 23. With my skin color, I can't imagine I'm getting very far. Could we pick a different time period? Also, I'm not even through my 20s yet. I don't think I'd know what to do with the equivalent amount of money if it fell into my lap today, let alone almost 50 years before I was born. I don't think this question was made for me. Story 24. IDK. I can't even open my own bank account back then, so probably get my suitcase immediately stolen since I can't stash it anywhere. Doubt I could buy a house in cash without my husband. Doubt I could do most things back then without my husband's permission/signature. Story 25. Buy the New York Yankees. Sign the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and Led Zeppelin. Show up in Washington to buy a huge stake in Microsoft. Befriend Steve Jobs, give him money. Buy Tesla before Elon Musk. Put the best people in place, then step away. Spend the last couple years of my life doing what I wish when I wish. Leave my grandchildren enough money to buy the planet. Story 26. Start as an electrician, then get a degree in business with a focus on the medical field. Use the money as seed money for investments based on my foreknowledge and to make the personal connections and have the education to make use of them. Also, make a few very large bets. Story 27. Find some nice man to marry. I can't have a bank account or anything on my own because I'm a woman. I would then get in touch with my grandmother on my mom's side. I would give her letters for my daughter and husband to deliver in the future. I would use some of the money to pay her to help me. She would be 15 at the time, so would likely believe me and do what I say. Besides, I look too much like her and know too many details. My grandma is 89 now and still has all of her mind in place. My daughter is her favorite person. My grandma would very much like hearing about her future life.